Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Cindy, for the great music. That's so nice. Yeah, thanks, Cindy. It's like a little concert. It's been so just really impressed me. I've just been very touched and blessed for us to be hosting this at our church this Sabbath, and thanks for participating, joining in, and getting to listen to our expert team here from the Church and State Council. I'd just like to welcome you back from the potluck. I see we have people who made it through the potluck, and we're here strong until all the blood goes to your stomach. And Laura, our Wibberding, our next presenter, is fully aware that she has to fight the afternoon sleepy. And she's great. Just to introduce her shortly too, before I have a word of opening prayer and hand the time over to Laura. Laura Wibberding is one of our esteemed professors at PUC. I went to PUC, and it's just so good to meet a teacher there, invested in the lives of those students, teaching history and political studies classes. They're actually chairing that department for PUC. So it's neat to see somebody who has a keen understanding both of history and a respect for the way that politics have played their way through history. And that's exactly what she's going to kind of open for us today in an Adventist context, right? If I got that right. Sort of. Okay, she's like, she'll fix it when she gets up here. But so nice to have Laura here. I'm just going to have a word of opening prayer and turn the time over to her. Afterwards, our Church and State Council has some giveaways. Are these like, is it a raffle or is it a... They're gonna throw some books into the crowd. Light books, but they have some stuff for us afterwards. So I just want to invite you to stick around for that, and then after we'll have a brief break and have a panel discussion where you can ask questions, and we have some pre-prepared questions to help us go a little deeper in conversation with you guys on this topic. So it's a great afternoon. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll hand the time over to Laura. Father God, thank you so much. You are the God that we see over and over again in these passages, in Scripture and Revelation, the one that holds these events in your hand, the one that continues to tell us peace and to fear not. Thank you that we can examine closely your teachings about comprehension. Thank you. We open them with and true purpose as a so God, bless us in this afternoon. Help us to have we need to hear, Father, as we have another presenter on this valuable topic. And so bless our time together. In your name we pray. Amen.
I know. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see the survivors, those of you who are still awake after that wonderful meal. This morning, we had some wonderful presentations. Alan, in particular, talked to us about the future. Well, I'm here to talk to you about the past. Such as it is, I'm going to tell you about Adventist history, how Seventh-day Adventists come to believe in the separation of church and state, and how does that reflect on us now. But before I do, I'd like to do a thing. Would you help me out with this? I like to do this sometimes when I am guest speaking somewhere. Could you stand up for a minute? I want to take a picture to remember this, so I'm going to turn around. We're going to do this selfie style. Would you wave for the picture? Thank you so much. All right. So I am a professor. I teach history and political studies and some religion at Pacific Union College. It has been it's been more than a decade since I used to preach every Sabbath. So this is going to be more of an academic presentation. Was a little jealous, envious of the other guy's slides here. These are going to be my basic slides, but you'll forgive me, and this will be a little bit more like you're in class. But we are going to start with a Bible text. I wanted to start with a story in Matthew chapter 22, verse 21. In Matthew 22, Jesus is asked a question about church and state. Well, not exactly about church and state. He's actually asked a question about taxes, which, definitely has a connection here. It's almost the same thing, right? Should we pay our taxes, or should I give this money to the temple? Anybody remember Jesus' answer for that? He says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. And while I couldn't make out your individual answers there, I'm confident that every one of you were saying that exactly correctly. He says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God what belongs to God. And this idea, Seventh-day Adventists take hold of in our history and say, this means that some things belong to the government. Some things belong to God. And what belongs to God does not belong to Caesar. This is the fundamental concept of the separation of church and state. Of course, government doesn't own things like our worship, or our faith, or our consciences, and the civil power doesn't have any business there. Now, this isn't the only view out there in the Christian world, and certainly for centuries of Christianity's history, this sort of an idea, separation of church and state, wasn't even an option. Even in our day, there are Christians in America who wonder if we made the right choice at the founding of our nation to make these things separate. Evangelical Christians in the U.S. lately have been fairly happy to shape laws around their moral beliefs. Pretty interested in getting that power. And allowing the majority Christian culture to dominate the public sphere. And as these ideas become more mainstream, particularly in conservative politics, many Seventh-day Adventists also are not as convinced that the separation of church and state is such a big deal or even the best option. So I'm going to talk about our Adventist history. How do Adventists become opposed to the combination of church and state? And hopefully, why I believe it still matters. So I'm going to have to start for just a moment. See, lecture slide. Lots of details on there. Sorry. You'll listen to me anyway, right? Not just read my slides. I need to start, though, with Christian nationalism before I talk about how the Seventh-day Adventists related to it. And I'm going to start you out with a spoiler, all right? Christian nationalism, or rather the push to make Christianity official and dominant and to give it a privileged place in American government and culture, this drive doesn't show up when Christianity is strong and thriving. This is a thing that Christians start pushing for when Christianity feels weak or when it feels threatened. Usually it feels threatened because of the introduction of new ethnic communities or new religious groups, or whenever Christians feel like they're not able to hold on to the prime place in American culture. It's a response to threats, often immigration or economic change. Now, there were always those who didn't like the way that the U.S. Constitution got written, because as we've discussed at some length, the founders, the writers of the Constitution, were explicit about not giving Christianity an official role in the new government, and in fact, trying to create kind of a buffer, an insulation between the two entities. However, this was not the view of all of the colonists at the time of the founding. We had the Puritans, who had come from a Calvinist tradition. In England, they'd even had the English Civil War and had managed to kill off the king and take control of the government for a while. It goes back into a kingship, and we get the Anglicans taking control again. And the Puritans, the more extreme Calvinists, end up looking for a place to create their own government, and that becomes certain colonies in the U.S., right? So the Calvinists had fought wars of succession in Europe. Many believed that their faith was the new Israel, and therefore the United States, the thing that would become the United States, was in fact the new Canaan, the promised land given to them by God. This also influences their willingness to drive out or even harm indigenous people who lived here already. Now, probably the most radical among them, it would be a group called the Covenanters among the Scottish Calvinist tradition. The Scottish Covenanters had taken a significant role in the English Civil War, and they were very explicit that they believed that religious freedom was simply a cover for vice and evil. Arguing freedom of conscience simply meant you wanted to give people license not to do the right thing. But if the U.S. is the new Israel, then it is vital that the U.S. law follows God's law, because we have a covenant relationship with God. According to that relationship, just like in the Old Testament, if the people do good and follow God's law, then God will bless them, and they'll keep their independence, and they'll prosper and thrive. But if they break God's law and do evil, like in the Old Testament, it's not just that God will withdraw his blessing, but God will actively punish America in order to bring us back in line. Now, around the 1860s, we have a ton of things going on. We've got the formation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We have the U.S. Civil War, but we also have a whole lot of immigration. We've got an uptick in immigration. The colonies, while they were rather diverse in themselves, had been largely Northern European Protestants, all mostly coming from Calvinist groups, but they were a whole lot of subgroups where they felt they had variety. Now, immigrants are coming because we've had industrialization since the 1830s. You're getting more factories in cities, you need workers, and a whole bunch of now Southern or Eastern Europeans are coming in. Now, these are poorer immigrants. Rather than moving all the way into the Midwest and starting farms and being those respectable farmers, they end up in cities where they are poor, they're crowded together, and they work in factories. The Irish immigrants are largely Catholic, and that feels threatening. We've got people arguing these Catholic immigrants are going to owe their highest loyalty not to America, but to the Pope in Rome. You also have German immigrants. Now, some of these are Catholic, some of them are Lutheran, but the Lutheran Church is not like the Calvinist Reformation. They're more comfortable drinking. The Puritans don't think they're very moral people there. So they decide that they need to reform them. This is where we get one of our early drives for Christian nationalism, and it's part of the push for general reform. There's lots of good things that they want to do. They want to improve poverty and sanitation in the cities, but they also want to fix up the non-Christianness of our nation. Let's go back, they say, and deal with the issue of the separation of church and state. So as has already been mentioned, we have the National Reform Association that shows up during this time. They say that at the first meeting of the National Reform Association, the speaker says that the Civil War was God's punishment because the U.S. was not a Christian nation. Because we created a secular constitution. The way to fix it then is we have to go back and change the Constitution to acknowledge God, so we want a constitutional amendment, and from there we will rebuild society on Christian lines. So they want to put Christian teachings into schools. They want to to ban the sale of liquor, prohibition, that's a whole other story, right? And they want laws protecting the sacredness of Sunday, so businesses won't operate there. These are ways that we're going to rebuild the U.S. into a Christian nation. This is early Christian nationalism, and it's going to go through different iterations. It'll kind of die back at times. It'll resurge when there are new ethnic groups coming in or there are changes. After World War II, there's another surge because the communists are atheists, so it's a good patriotic thing to be a Christian, that sort of thing. However, Seventh-day Adventists start their lifetime as survivors of the Millerite movement in the 1860s, opposed to it. And they come by it honestly. The picture up here is Charles Fitch. He's one of the leaders of the Millerite movement in the 1840s. This movement was preaching about the soon coming of Jesus based on the prophecy in Daniel chapter 7. Of course, this movement is disappointed. They believe that Jesus is going to come when that time prophecy in Daniel comes to an end, and that was in 1844, and it didn't happen. However, as we're preparing for that to come, Charles Fitch preaches a significant sermon, and you can find it actually online, the whole thing. It's a super long sermon called "Come Out of Her, My People," and it's about why the Millerite believers should leave their churches. On a sweltering July day, he preaches this to a crowd in the open air. It's from Revelation 14, and he tells the Advent believers that they need to leave their churches who don't support their hope of Jesus' soon coming. See, the churches were at first really excited to have Millerite preachers come because it brought a bunch of people out, and so you could have a revival, and people would come back to your church, and that was great fun. But as they got close to October 22, 1844, the churches became less and less comfortable with the Millerite message, and they begin to put pressure on the Millerites to quit agitating so much about it. Fitch says that, in fact, the fact that your church doesn't want you to talk about Jesus' second coming means that they are fallen. They're not a true church, and so you have to leave them, just like the angel in Revelation 14 says. I owe Kevin Burton for this insight. I had always taught this in class as they're like, well, you know, they're trying to kick us out. Well, we didn't want to be with you anyway, so it's like it's a way to save face, it's to deal with it. But no, Fitch is making a more significant argument, and I hadn't noticed this until historian Kevin Burton pointed it out. The reason he says that this means they're fallen is because it's a different idea of Jesus' rule on earth. The reason they don't believe that Jesus is coming very soon is that these churches are largely post-millennialists. You're probably familiar with the term millennium. In the book of Revelation, there's described this 1,000 years of peace when Satan's not loose to tempt on the earth, right? All the Christians believe that's going to happen at the end of time, but where is the second coming happening? The post-millennialists say that Jesus is going to come after the 1,000 years. That means that the church on earth is going to triumph. We'll convert everybody in the world, and we will have 1,000 years of a Christian age, and it'll be a good and just spiritual society, and then at the end of it, Jesus will come. Whereas the premillennialists say Jesus is going to come at the start of that, and then the 1,000 years of peace were created because Jesus came and fixed all our problems for us, right? The Millerites are premillennialists. So the postmillennialists feel like the Millerites have got it all wrong. The second coming can't be anywhere near that soon because we have to have the millennium happen first. Fitch says that it's not just that these people don't believe Jesus is coming soon, they don't want him to. He says that what they want is a religious government, this Christian society who's going to rule that society? Well, people are, right? Because Jesus hasn't come yet. So these churches are fallen because what they want is not the personal reign of Jesus on earth, but human beings reigning in Jesus' place. He says this is just exactly what the church did in the Middle Ages. You had a human being interpreting God's law and wielding God's authority, right? Well, this Christian millennium is another case of having a human being rule in God's place. This is a quote from the sermon. Each one of these sects, that is, these denominations, is willing to rule the world just as the papists have done for Christ, but no one of them is willing to have Christ come in person to rule the world for himself. That is why he says these groups are fallen and you need to leave. Even at the Millerite stage, we have a rejection of the idea that we can have a Christian government or a Christian society. The only thing that will happen if we try to create a Christian society is human beings taking the authority of God, just like human beings did all throughout the Middle Ages, and the results we get from that aren't going to be good. But we go beyond that. I have a picture here of J.N. Andrews. This is actually the 1850s, so this is still the time between the Great Disappointment and the official forming of the Seventh-day Adventists, but these disappointed Millerites are still developing their theology about Revelation, and Andrews comes up with a new understanding about this beast in Revelation 13. Now, you probably heard both in Sabbath school and in the church service about the beast of Revelation 13. Seventh-day Adventists say that this is actually the United States. This beast shows up in the land. It comes up after the first beast is mentioned, and it leads people to worship that first beast. And it's not described in detail physically. Instead, it just said it had two horns like a lamb, kind of a little gentle image, but it spoke like a dragon. Andrews says that, in fact, this is going to be the United States. In fact, he says those two horns that make everyone think that it's gentle and good were the core principles of religious liberty and civil liberty that the United States was founded by. But, he says, the U.S. will eventually abandon both of these principles. And how do we know? Because it is willing to compromise so much on civil liberty in order to have slavery. In fact, here are some images, the two conflicting images of the United States. I want to focus on the first one here. This is an early Adventist depiction, that little cartoon image, of the second beast in Revelation 13. It's got all these pieces from the other beasts there, and then it's got two horns. Notice that tied to its ankle, there are a couple of chains, and those are labeled. One is labeled slavery, and the other creeds. If the United States is not going to follow what it preaches about civil liberty, and we're going to say slavery is okay, we can deal with that for the benefit it gets us, then we're going to also renege on our promise of religious liberty, therefore introducing creeds that are binding on believers there. And this is a portrayal of the United States. Notice the second picture here is a picture by artist John Gast, and it was called American Progress. It shows up, it was done in the 1870s, 1872. It's got a really different vibe. That woman there, kind of floating like an angel above the scene, represents America. Do you notice things in common between the two pictures? Any things that are in both pictures? The trains, good. The railroads. Oh, that's true, yes. Notice what's on the poles going around the water there. And the American Progress, the woman, I think they named her Columbia, but she represents America. What's she doing? Yes, those are telegraph lines. The railroads and the telegraph lines are the two symbols of America's technological progress. These are modernization. They go into industrializing nations all over the world. These are symbols of American progress. Notice how much different the Adventist image portrays them. It's not that it's bad, but it's certainly not, it hasn't made us good just because we have technological progress here. Still a beast. Over here you can see some of the details. She's headed west, bringing civilization, apparently. You see these white settlers in the coaches and the covered wagon. The Native Americans and the buffalo are going off. Notice it's darker on that side. That's California. Sorry. No, I'm a fan of California. Never mind. But we've got really different images here. She's bringing civilization across the continent. Adventists don't believe that these advances in technology are marching us toward a triumphal reign of progress. Instead, we expect to fall into a new persecution. So, early Adventist concepts about church and state are these. First of all, religious government is oppressive. Anytime you give human beings the power to speak for God, it doesn't go well. They'll say that happened poorly in the Middle Ages. It's going to do the same thing if it happens now. Also, the Adventists are premillennialists. They don't believe that any human beings can create a Christian government and make things better. In fact, we expect the world to get worse and worse, and the only thing that's going to save us is not the Christianizing of society, it's the second coming of Jesus. Jesus is the only way that can get us out of the mess that we're making. But here's where Seventh-day Adventists go contrary to expectations. As premillennialists, historians would expect that Adventists would then withdraw from the world and not get involved in the state or in political things. They're going to not be active in public life because you can't fix things, right? So just hunker down till Jesus comes. That's not what they do. Even though our predecessors don't believe that we're going to solve our problems, and even though their predecessors believe things are actually going to get worse, not better, they do get involved in public life, in social issues, and even in the political system because they want to keep religious liberty for as long as possible. The U.S., they say, is going to renege on its promises of religious freedom, but for as long as we can have, we want to keep that freedom so that we have time to spread the gospel. That is why Adventists get involved in politics. You can see a picture here. This is the first issue of the American Sentinel. It was Adventists' very first religious liberty paper. I believe this is 1886. That they start printing it. I suppose if I could see closer on my slide, I would see it, but it does have a date on there. And I'm going to take an interlude to say something nice about California, right? So it's a thing about, John Gass didn't have a great view of California, but I do. Adventists get a boost from how things go in California. Now, the state of California got its first Sunday law in 1858, and it was immediately challenged in court by a Jewish, I believe he was a cobbler, who opened his shop on Sunday so that he could take the case to court and challenge the legality of that law according to the California state constitution. It was immediately overturned as a religious law because the constitution of the state said you couldn't have religious laws. However, by the time 3 years went by, the California Supreme Court had changed over some of its justices. The leading justice in that case had retired, and the one who wrote the opposing position was now the Chief Justice. They created a new state Sunday law, and although it had multiple legal challenges, over the years, every time it went to the court said it was okay. It wasn't a religious law, they said, but it was just a use of the government's police power to protect the health, the welfare, and the morals of society. These were all legitimately under the power of government, they said. Now, it's not entirely popular, it's not enforced everywhere, and we have, like in other places, in the 1880s, we've got a push, once again, to Christianize, and therefore to make new laws protecting Sunday and to enforce the ones that are on the books. So we've got a group called the Home Protection Society in California, and they push saying we should enforce the laws and we should add more details to it and we should have more local laws, right? On the other side is a group called the League of Freedom. These are people who are opposed to the Sunday laws, and in the League of Freedom, it's mostly saloon owners and liquor dealers and secularists, and of course, guess who the Adventists decide to go with? Absolutely, we do, with the League of Freedom. Willie White, he's in the picture here. He gets arrested for operating the Pacific Press on Sunday. The Home Protection Society actually publishes something in the paper saying, no, we only meant that law to apply to the bad people. You're a nice Christian person, so we didn't mean to hurt you. But the Adventists are not really mollified by this because they have seen places in the U.S. where exceptions were made for Sunday laws for those who keep Saturday, and those exceptions often get dropped and reversed. So they join with the League of Freedom. They kind of hold their noses about the liquor issue, and they start campaigning to repeal that law. In 1879, California has a constitutional convention to rework its constitution. Make some progress, not entirely. The Adventists send Merritt Kellogg, who is the first Adventist to preach in California. He's a medical doctor, founds the St. Helena Hospital now. Merritt Kellogg goes to the Constitutional Convention to try to encourage getting rid of the Sunday laws. There's no record that this actually makes an impact, but the united effort overall finally does. So in 1882, in the statewide elections, the state's Republican Party decides that they're going to make law and order part of their platform, and part of that is supporting Sunday closing laws. Let's have stricter laws and let's uphold these. So then the California Democrats decide that they're going to be opposed to it. They say that they will repeal the law if they are elected into office. And even though the Republican Party had gotten the majority quite handily before, this time the Democrats do. This is aided in part by attempts to enforce the law in San Francisco that are very unpopular. They had so many people getting arrested, they couldn't process them all on the Sunday when they were arrested. So they get this horrible backlog and people are really frustrated about it. In the 1882 election, the Democratic Party takes charge, and the Adventists rejoiced, which is not a thing Adventists had done when Democrats won all the time. But California became the very first state to completely repeal Sunday closing laws, and that was the end of them. Now, I have a lovely quote from the International Reform Party, is a political party that's connected to the National Reform Association, where sometime later, looking back at this, he complains and saying, it's a shame that 26,000 Adventists did more than 26 million Christians on this issue. Apparently we're not Christians because of the Sunday laws. All right. Of course, now I can't talk about early Adventists and religious liberty without talking about this guy. This guy is our rock star on religious liberty. This is A.T. Jones. He is the co-editor of that American Sentinel, that first religious liberty paper. He's going to become the first head of the National Religious Liberty Association in 1889, and then This is actually organized after the 1888 Blair Sunday Bill, which was a bill in the U.S. Congress to create a nationwide Sunday law. It was defeated. Adventists campaigned rigorously against it and create the National Religious Liberty Association the next year. In 1901, when the church gets reorganized, that association becomes the Religious Liberty Department of the church, and he becomes the first head of that. So what does he do? He's got his publishing work, he's got his speaking work, but he also goes to Congress repeatedly to speak against religious laws. So we've got in 1890 the Breckinridge Bill. Oh, yeah, I'm jumping ahead, aren't I? Okay, so the 1888 Blair Sunday Bill. In 1889, there's a bill to Christianize schools. That one doesn't get very far. In 1890, the Breckinridge Bill is just about Sunday closing in the District of Columbia. He goes to testify there too. And then again in 1910, he's no longer the head of the Religious Liberty Department. It's the next guy you'll see on the next 2 slides down. But he still goes to testify. Okay, so for 1890, I had a quote here. He is arguing against Wilbur F. Crafts of the American Sabbath Union. The 2 speakers before him have already insulted him, either personally or indirectly. One of them said that Adventists were an insignificant sect allied with secularists, atheists, and socialists, and said they shouldn't really get a voice in this here. So Jones gets up for his turn, and Jones is kind of an explosive character. I was going to say that he was the bomb, and sometimes it's a little closer to being literal than we would have liked. He could be kind of plain in his speaking here. So he actually uses Wilbur Crafts' own book against him. Wilbur Crafts had written a book apparently urging workers to choose to rest on Sundays and to refuse to work on that day voluntarily. And so in his book, he has cited 200 workers in various professions who claimed that they had never, ever suffered for refusing to work on Sunday. Jones says, what about all these people? If that's really true, then why do you need a law to enforce it here? Here we go. He closes up his testimony in the 1910 bill by saying the legislation that they're contemplating inevitably forces a union of church and state, and that can only sink the state. And to the whole nation, the result can only be that the Church of the United States will force the masses to accept the kind of religion she has to offer, a religion of force, instead of all the people accepting the religion of their own choice, as our fathers, by the Constitution, fixed matters here as they hoped forever. Yeah, I know that's a really excessive use of commas there, but nevertheless, he says, our founding fathers said this religious liberty should be permanent, and someone is attacking the principles of America. Following A.T. Jones in the Religious Liberty Department is a guy by the name of Kit Carson Russell. He starts in 1904, and he's going to preside over the starting of Liberty Magazine, which is right here, and still going, right, in 1906. This is a magazine for the politically involved and the politically interested. He does all kinds of creative things. Now, one of the things about Kit Carson Russell is he seems to be speaking to religious audiences. I've read a bunch of his articles in Liberty Magazine about it, and he's always using a religious argument. It's important that legislation not favor one religious group over another group, he says, not because it's against the Constitution, which he will also mention, but because it violates the golden rule. We shouldn't have forced Christian practices because it's bad for Christianity. It causes people to be hypocrites, to have to practice a faith that they don't believe. He does such diverse things as in 1906, In Grand Rapids, Michigan, local church leaders managed to shut down the movie theaters on Sundays. Shut down the theaters on Sundays. Now, Russell and others have a public meeting. They're opposed to this, not because it's the theater, because they're not into theaters, but because they're opposed to Sunday shutdowns. So they actually go to the theater and say, hey, let's have a public meeting and we'll speak in your defense. So they do that, and they have these meetings, and Russell says, here, me and my friends here on this stage, we don't believe in going to theaters. But, he says, the civil government is only supposed to control civil matters. So you could only shut down the theater if it's uncivil. If it's okay the other 6 days of the week, you need to leave it open on Sunday. In the state of Kentucky, he will also be an informal defense. He's not working as an attorney exactly, but he's defending a family who were arrested for picking strawberries on their family farm on Sunday. He argues that it violates the state constitution, and in the end, they are not convicted. But largely, he says that this is to protect good Christian morality. Genuine Christianity has to be voluntary. Otherwise, it's not really Christianity. I threw in a couple of cartoons that show up in Liberty Magazine during this time. I'm not sure how well they show up, depending on how close you are. And I certainly didn't do a scan of all the magazines to try and find everything. There's just a couple of them. But you notice the first one, we've got a wedge. Somebody's got a hammer called Political Pressure. That's the National Reformer. He's labeled. The other guy's labeled National Reformer also. And the wedge says government enforcement of sectarian doctrines, but behind it is a religious amendment to the Constitution. They are trying to pry open the doors to Congress to get this in. The second one shows America as a ship. It says American Ship of State. And it's headed for the rocks. The rocks are labeled political laws establishing religious observances, and on the individual rocks you see hate and bigotry and such. But the lighthouse is trying to warn them off. This is the warning of history, and on the tower of that lighthouse there are things from history like religious wars of Germany and slaughter of the Waldenses and the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day and such. History should tell us not to make religious legislation because it's going to go badly. I have one more historical character I need to tell you about. I really meant to start a timer when I started here, but I did not, and that's... Nevertheless, I am coming to an end here. I need to tell you about Lulu Russell Whiteman. I don't know if you notice the similarity in her name to the guy before. This is his sister. Lulu Russell Whiteman was 12 years younger than Kit Carson Russell. They had another brother, Edgar Torrey Russell, who is also an Adventist minister and is also involved in religious liberty. There was something about this family, and I'm just imagining what the conversations were on a Thanksgiving dinner, meeting, getting together. Lulu Russell Whiteman is best known in Adventism for being an Adventist minister. She's an evangelist, and she's planting churches in upstate New York, and she's doing an outstanding job in the 1890s and in the 1910s. Eventually, she'll move to the Midwest, where her brother Edgar Torrey Russell is, and she'll begin to take up the idea of religious liberty and the importance of it. Eventually, she's going to part ways with the Seventh-day Adventists, but she will never give up the issue of religious liberty, and she comes out to California in time. She calls herself the evangelist of liberty, and you can't find her writings in the Adventist publications, but you can find them, actually, in the newspapers. You find the old California newspaper archives, and she wrote 2 booklets about her views. As the evangelist of liberty, she'll go and she'll sometimes preach in halls and stuff. She did actually preach to, I think it was the Illinois state legislature, about the separation of church and state. But she goes to street corners also. She'll give word to the papers when she's coming, and she'll say, I'm going to be on this street corner on this day. or that one on the other day, and this will be my topic, and people come out. They actually show up in the hundreds and listen to her preach on the street. And as she's preaching, she's going to do things. She's going to have the same principles as Jones and Russell, but she's going to use different texts. Since she's an evangelist of liberty, she's going to be quoting from the U.S. Constitution and from judges and from legislators, and she's going to be primarily saying, this is un-American. So Kit Carson Russell says, combining church and state is bad for Christianity. Whiteman is going to say, it's also bad for America. It's un-American. The place where she splits is she's going to see prohibition as the same sort of violation of liberty. If we believe it's so important to have individual liberty of conscience, that should apply to whether you drink alcohol or not. She actually quotes Frances Willard, leader of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, for that. But that one was a whole story. Now, the newspapers are actually fairly complimentary. Might be the political lean of the newspapers. They're like, oh, she says some very important things that you should listen to, and she has this easy to listen, this beautifully modulated voice, and she's very sensible, and they'll give her this backward compliment saying that she's so much more worth listening to than most women. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the way they compliment her as being an exception to womanhood. However, she's also got her detractors too. There's a minister who preaches a whole sermon against her because of her stance on prohibition, calling her the devil in petticoats. And once, some of her listeners turned to fire hoses on her. Whiteman is going to make enemies of the reformers twice as fast as most Adventists because she doesn't just oppose Sunday laws, she also opposes prohibition. In the end, Whiteman is following her conscience, and she's going to do it differently than the other Adventists do, and this is the way things go. But I put her in here partly because I think she's super cool, but also because it's important to notice that it's nice to preach a sermon about how important it is to keep church and state separate. I really believe in that. But we need to acknowledge that how we do that in the details is going to be a little more complicated. Russell, her brother, says that the civil government gets control of things that are civil, and anything that is religious belongs to God, right? Whiteman will say the civil government gets the things that are civil, that's where Caesar's realm is, but things that are religious or moral belong to God. And the moral is where things get a little bit messy in between, right? She tells her audience once about how terrible it is that Californians are losing their liberties because in Los Angeles they are contemplating laws that would regulate the length of women's skirts and forbid smoking in public. And to her, those are both the same, and to me, they're not. Right? There's a complication on where to draw the line. Where can I leave us here, since this is the end? Seventh-day Adventists have always, from our prehistory, believed in the separation of church and state. And that's gotten us into some interesting places. It's caused us to have some fairly strange alliances, ending up working together with the saloon owners sometimes, even though then we're going to go on later as a church and say we want prohibition. We do it because we say it's good for Christianity and it's good for the government as well. Both of these entities will be harmed if they're combined. And last of all, it's important to know that we don't always agree on exactly how to do it. We are in a complex world today. We've got complex issues, and how to separate church and state is a little bit fuzzy in the way laws dealing with human behavior and morality are presenting themselves to us. I believe that this founding principle of religious liberty, this separation of church and state, is still vitally important. It's important for our future, that while we may lose religious freedom in the United States, we should still defend it for as long as possible. It won't be easy, and it will sometimes be complicated. That's all right. It's still an Adventist principle, and we'll still do our best. That's all I got.
We'll do this one. Oh, thanks. You're already on it. Thanks, Austin. Thanks, guys. Thanks, George. Wow, thank you, Laura. That's amazing. I'm jealous for some of the moments when I had to step out with my daughter because I'm like, I'm going to have to watch the live stream. It's on the live stream if you want to circle back on anything today. I just want to thank you guys for just being a part of this conversation. We're going to take a brief intermission, but before we do, I wanted to just ask a few questions. I have some stuff to give away as promised here. And I'm just wondering, did anybody bring who had the most people that they brought today? Did anybody bring their family or bring somebody that, I'm just trying to think of good excuses to give something away. You brought 2 people. Did anybody bring more than 2 people today? Yeah, everybody that brought somebody. Yeah, we got a few of these. Okay, well, Patrice, here you go. And did anybody catch it? What was the year that Adventism was founded? Did anybody catch that one? Yes. Oh, 1860, which? 1860, that's a decade. I'll give it to you. I think it's 1863, isn't it? I hope the conference isn't watching if I got that wrong. Let me see, what else? Who's kind of traveled, who's not a church member here, they traveled in? Did anybody travel in to join us today? Oh, that's excellent. Who traveled? Let's see. How far away? Did anybody drive for more than an hour to get here? Yeah? All right. I think you're our winner there. Thanks. So I've got some more stuff for you here. Where are you from? Kimbertown? Shingletown. Oh, okay. Thanks for joining us. All right. Let's see. What else do I got up here? Well, if you just come see me if you'd like a bumper sticker or a book after this, but we're going to all go ahead and pivot to our break. We'll take about 10 minutes here, and just stretch your legs. If you want to get fresh air, there's doors right here, or just wander our lobby. There may or may not be coffee over here that's powdered if you need that, and we'll convene back here for a panel discussion sort of to cap our day together.